Cadi, how are you?
I'm very well, Mike. How are you doing?
Good, I'm all right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time today. Much appreciated. How's your day been so far?
Hectic, but I'm glad to be here and great that we've got some time together.
Indeed. So can you start us off, as is traditional, with a little potted history of your career to date, please, leading us up to Index Exchange?
Of course I can. And I'll... This will sound funny, but I'm going to start at the beginning. So I studied languages at university. I did my year abroad. I wanted to be a lawyer. Did my year abroad working for a law firm. Got there, and this, you can tell my age from this, but got there and they decided that they needed an intranet site, an internal website. And they were like, well, you're a young person, you can build it for us. And so basically on my year out, when I thought I was going to be learning how to be a lawyer, I learned how to code. And as I graduated, I sort of was thinking, well, do you know what? I'm not sure about this lawyering thing, but I reckon this internet might just take off. And so I was able to get a job at a publisher, a scientific B2B publisher, but on the basis when the timing was that ads were all hard-coded onto the page. So I got the job basically because if someone phoned up and yelled at me, I could make the font bigger or the text red or whatever they wanted. And then my career just progressed through that. In 2008, I joined Yahoo around the same time that they bought the Right Media Exchange. And that was my sort of entry into programmatic. I moved across from search into, it wasn't even really programmatic then, it was just exchange-based buying. But I fell in love with that, and that's been my passion ever since. And so from Yahoo through various other different companies through to Index Exchange. And at Index now, I run our Emea business. So we're about 600 people globally, and making a really different stance in the world of programmatic advertising, the world of SSP. So it's an exciting place to be.
That's funny. You're a young person. You can build a website. I had somebody contact me on LinkedIn recently. She was looking for social media work, and I said, "Oh, do you know LinkedIn? Because we do a lot of our best work on LinkedIn." He said, "Well, I haven't really done LinkedIn, but I'm a Gen Z, so I can do that." So it's a similar thing, but from her side, she was like, "I can definitely do that because I'm young."
I love that. Yeah. No, I was definitely very daunted in the beginning, but got there in the end. I mean, I definitely couldn't build a modern one in any way that's sort of beautiful and attractive. But those early days of the web, it was a bit of a free for all, and so it's interesting actually that the parallel, a lot of Index's origin story is in Andrew, our CEO and founder, having running publishers, running sites himself, and then figuring out how to monetize them, and that's how he really fell upon this idea of becoming an SSP and making that experience better for publishers.
So I know we're going to talk about CTV today, but what other media do Index Exchange sort of power, facilitate, sell?
Really everything across the programmatic advertising ecosystem. So I think the bulk of revenue certainly is split between display and video, with CTV being a big part of those video numbers.
Right, cool. So back to CTV. So I was at Opera when CTV was really new, and we were all getting very excited about the Opera browser. We had about 10 users because it was like super early days, and obviously things have changed a lot since then. So it'd be great to sort of talk to you about that change and that growth. But if you had to pitch CTV as a media channel to a media buyer to get onto a media plan, how would you pitch it? What do you think its sort of core strengths are?
Well, I think if you think about first of the medium itself of TV, it's the best medium because of that combination of sight, sound and motion. It's always proven to have such significant impact on the audiences that are engaging with that content.
Do you know how many times I've said sight, sound, emotion in my career? I've worked with video for so long. I love that.
I'm sorry.
It's the medium that we most closely resembles the way that we experience real life. Right?
Exactly.
It feels as real as any medium can.
And so it imprints in your psyche. And there's so much research about it. So I'm like, you're the last person I need to have to explain TV to. But I think the difference then when you talk about CTV or streaming TV is in that CTV space, you then combining that power in front of an audience with some of the advantages that come with digital advertising and advertising that is delivered digitally. And so there we're talking about targeting, about optimization, about measurement. And I think it's that combination is why there's so much sort of hype and excitement around this medium, this part of our industry.
Cool. Well, I also worked on the early days of video on demand, or like online video, if you like, and I'm really showing my age now because obviously it's everywhere now. But
it's AVOD, so advertising funded video on demand is 15%, I believe, is the latest IAB study. Don't quote me on that, I haven't got my phone out, but I think it was 15% of UK TV consumption now. Wow. So it's significant.
So that sight, sound, motion thing, I used that a lot in the early days of video on demand to try and sort of push it forward. But one of the challenges, I guess, that we had in the early days of VOD was who buys it, because it's a TV creative as far as people could tell in the early days, but it's a digital platform. So the relationships were with the digital teams, but the TV teams will go, well, hang on a minute, like that's our asset sort of thing, And so I think a lot of agencies ended up with VOD teams, like specialist VOD teams that kind of sat across the two. Are we seeing something similar in CTV where there's kind of a bit of a bun fight on who should buy this, who should be sort of leading these sort of buying discussions?
I think that certainly was a challenge. You talk about going into an agency and you turn left for the linear planners and then right for the VOD planners or the digital planners. I think what we've seen certainly across the bigger agencies is a bringing together of teams, like thinking about really how a brand wants to reach their audience. There are some audiences that are not necessarily consuming huge amounts of linear TV. There are other audiences who really split their time between linear and then digitally served streamed TV. And so I think really you can't now operate in a sort of siloed way. So you've seen a lot of teams, a lot of agencies bring those teams together, and it's been an amazing journey for them. You've seen a lot of the sort of traditional planner buyers getting really excited about what is possible when they are opening up, but bringing new challenges to the medium, because the things that people are used to planning, ways that advertisers are used to working with TV, need to be able to be reflected through those streamed and through that CTV, those CTV mechanics. So I think what we've seen as those teams have come together, and the challenges from both sides have sort of overlapped and knitted in together, we're seeing a lot of new and cool solutions and standards come up that solve for a lot of those problems. But I think so that coming together, that you sort of talked about that fragmented approach originally. I think you're right. It was very separate. Now I think there was a period where it was uncomfortable together, where we're humans, change is hard, but I think now we're at a point where there are generally approaches that are, and we see it with the agencies that we work with, there is an approach around what is going to be the best result for this advertiser, how are we going to reach the audience that they need to reach, and pulling in the strengths of both teams to make the actual end results, the outcomes, stronger for their brand, for their client. But it's been a journey.
Yeah, for sure. Talking of journeys, then you talked about it was separate, and now they found a way of working together. Mobile was a bit like that, right? In the early days of the mobile, if I hear the year of the mobile again, but it was standalone. My mate Murph ran Mobile Marketing Magazine. It's still going, of course, but everything was mobile's very separate to everything else. But now it's quite often it's a part of digital, like it's just a part of digital, right? Do you think that CTV is close to becoming just a part of TV? It's just TV. We don't need to worry about whether it's CTV or whether it's linear.
I think it's yes, I think we're there, but I'm not sure if it's that CTV has become just TV, or if TV has become part of video. I think it's a little bit of both. I think there have been steps from both sides to bring those things closer together. Again, really focusing on delivering the right results for advertisers and for the brands who want to be in that medium. And so there isn't that same siloed approach. It's interesting, we haven't seen quite the same thing happen in mobile. There weren't the separate mobile agencies, it was CTV agencies being absorbed by the agencies in the same way that did happen if you think about some of those agency acquisitions, Forward and the like, in the mobile space. God, that's going back a bit.
Yeah, indeed. I worked for Full Screen that was mobile only, and you wouldn't think of there being a mobile only company now, really, would you? Like,
no.
not in the same way, at least. So you mentioned like the power of the big screen, but with the kind of also with the power of targeting. What sort of targeting is available now? Because I know, again, and I'm not a CTV expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I know in the early days it was a little bit contextual, and that's it, really. Like, we're going to try and put this ad around sort of relevant content or at the right time or something like that. But obviously that's moved on a lot. So what sort of targeting is being applied to CTV now?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think this is where we're thinking about those teams coming together, those approaches coming together. It's really important as someone who with a background in digital media to not assume that one-to-one or audience-based targeting is necessarily the only approach or the right approach. And so when you think about TV as a medium and you think about it generally being the biggest screen in the house, in the living room, it's a one-to-many environment oftentimes. And so I think we're seeing the most successful targeting still coming into that sort of contextual category. So whether you're thinking about channel, whether you're thinking about show, or whether you're thinking about contextual environments and that sort of type of content that we're seeing that being really the targeting that is being adopted to drive most scale and most impact, because that's the way, again, that people would often think of TV and buying TV. So why change that in that environment, especially where we've seen with GDPR and some of the regulations in the online space, making us think twice about very granular audience targeting. So you're right that there is more targeting available, but actually if you're wanting to deliver a campaign at scale, which is some of the beauty of the medium, then it's not really a one-to-one environment in the same way that your mobile is. That
makes sense. It makes total sense. But quite often, if you can, people do, right? Like, to start with, at least you go, okay, I remember that the best, if that's the right word for it, campaign that I was ever asked to deliver was £100,000 worth of media, mobile only, in Schiphol Airport over a weekend. And I was like, are you joking?
Did you text everyone 10 times?
Yes. So everyone on a plane now. We got some work to do. But so it's because that sort of, I joke, but that because that data's available and that targeting's available, it's like really tempting, right, to use it, even if actually let's leave it very broad. Let's leave it like linear TV. Let's lose it contextual. Are you not seeing people still thinking, right, but we're going to play with the toolkit and we're going to find a way of?
And look, I think it depends, and I think what we're seeing with the rise of things of curation and applying some of this targeting on the sell side. So by applying it on the SSP, you're able to reach more granular audiences, more highly targeted content at scale, at a bigger scale than if you're trying to find that same audience group on just the inventory that has reached your DSP. So there are ways of applying more granular targeting, but it's not necessarily the way that people are used to buying, and it's not going to be at a scale that is going to be successful. So ultimately, you're going to end up frustrating someone. And so I think generally we're in a position now where agencies and advertisers are a bit smarter about what they're asking for. What we are seeing a lot of still is people transacting still on a programmatic guaranteed basis. I think when people think about programmatic, they think about bidding, they think about auctions, they think about about second price auctions. Obviously, is the original way that programmatic advertising operated, and I think that's what we've really seen as a sort of different approach in the TV space. Seeing brands and their agencies lean into partnering with their DSPs to be able to transact the inventory they want at scale, but being prepared to make commitments for that. And so that's where I think we've seen programmatic guaranteed being the dominant transaction type, or at least a significant transaction type, with then some activity falling into that private marketplace scenario as well.
So that's on the planning side then. So what about measurement? How is CTV typically measured?
That is how long is a piece of string kind of question. We see at the most basic level, similarly to how you would measure any kind of TV, you're looking at delivery and you're looking at, literally, did I get the right number of views? Did my campaign serve the amount that it should have done? Where I think it gets more interesting is that there are a ton of interesting measurement companies in this space who are able to help bridge those teams within those agencies, so bridge that sort of linear thinking with the digital thinking and help people to better understand the impact that they're seeing by adding CTV to the mix. So things like looking at the incremental reach and or incremental frequency that you're able to achieve to a specific audience by combining those different types of buys. And so I think that's very interesting, whether that's Qmee or Samba or the Audience Project. There's lots of folks doing quite interesting studies to support and just provide reassurance that what an advertiser is getting is additive, it's incremental. I think we're also increasingly, where you talked about performance a bit before and brought that up. I think we are seeing brands generally leaning into MMM assessments and even like applying geographical regional holdouts, particularly for brands who are light on data. If you think about FMCG, or if we have Americans listing the CPG brands, where they might want, it might be quite easy for them, particularly in that CTV environment, to do some more narrow geo-targeting. They can very, very quickly see what is the impact on sales of this particular product in a store. And so it's a sort of it really is a how long is a piece of string question, because you can measure a lot, but not, again, quite in the same way because of it being that one-to-many medium, because of the restrictions that are correctly in place around privacy, and because it's a different device. You're not going to have the same kind of instant DR measuring that you would expect from, say, social media. Yeah.
You mentioned there the impact on sales and doing sort of geo targeting there. Are you seeing a lot of CTV being bought as a part of retail media strategies? I've had Nick from Tesco and Dean from Co-op on, and we talk about this. What Nick calls it from sofa to store, right? So trying to reach a consumer from the moment they're sat watching Coronation Street or whatever to the moment they get to the store, and obviously CTV can be a big part of that, sort of bringing the awareness and the consideration while somebody's on the sofa, and then maybe some out of home, and then the in-store stuff as well. So are you seeing that happen?
I think we're seeing across the board, but yes, we're seeing that happen in retail media a lot, because those brands do need to be able to make that public promise to their audiences, to their target consumers, that their product is worth it. And there's still that association in consumers in all of our minds with seeing brands on telly, that it is that sort of public promise medium. I think it's interesting now to see TV opening up, and I think that's the other angle that this sort of rise in CTV has done, seeing that more brands who might never have been able to think about putting their brand on TV in the past can also come into this space. So it's interesting, I think, that this opening up, this democratization of the inventory that's available has seen more advantages for brands that you would expect to see on TV, but it's also heralded this sort of arrival of new money into the medium. And that's really exciting for those media owners. Like, think about being a broadcaster or a streamer in this space and being able to work with brands who might otherwise not be able to to use your medium. And I think that's really exciting as well. So it's really at both ends of the spectrum that there's been a huge amount of change and adoption.
So that new money, as you called it, that's more kind of mid-tier companies at the moment, right? But do you think it will get to the point where your local Indian restaurant will be able to advertise because they'll only buy 3,000 houses or something like that, 5,000 houses in a local area? They'll be able to make an advert really inexpensively using AI, and they'll be able to target people in the local area. I think it might be quite good for consumers, assuming the creative is okay, because you'd think, oh, this is super relevant TV to me. This is TV in my area. It's not like international or even national. It's like in my Epsom for me, for example, if, I'm getting lots of Epsom advertising. I
think we're seeing that already to some extent in the US. But I think at the moment, the biggest change has been in that mid-tail brands who might have historically only spent money on search and social because that was easy and it was one button, but actually, exactly to your point, being able to reach the consumers that they want and not waste their budget is a powerful tool. But I think it's we're maybe a little way from having at scale local advertisers, but it's absolutely possible now. And I don't know. I don't like to crystal, to gaze into the crystal ball too much. But I think that it could be something that evolves, because who wouldn't want to see? Would you not want to see 6 sales branded all over your TVs?
Well, my first job in media, I was worked at a local newspaper, the Sutton Guardian, and one of my biggest customer bases was local restaurants, and they just loved it. We did a thing called the Wine and Dine, which is a page full of restaurant advertising, but one advertiser each week would get the editorial, and they love that so much. There's an Indian restaurant near me called Dastan, which is amazing. I don't know why. I must be getting hungry. I'm talking a lot about Indian restaurants. And they were in the Guardian once, and they're still talking about it now. Like that, I mean, in terms of in the National Guardian, they adore that sort of thing. So the idea of being on television locally, people would. I think local companies, big companies like being on telly because they understand it all right. But local companies would think that's something that's so unachievable that is now achievable. Yeah. I think you could. From a financial point of view, you could, charge a good CPM for that. Yes,
I mean, a lot of our partners at Index in the US are really doing that. I think in Europe there are some additional challenges to it with the fragmentation more of the markets. The fact that we are still transacting on a much more likely to be guaranteed or a much more sort of committed way at the moment. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. So. Cadi, you probably know if you run a podcast, you're not allowed to get through an episode without talking about AI. It's the law.
Is that actually
it's the law?
Now?
Yeah, otherwise they don't let you do it.
I hadn't realised it being ratified.
So it's a standard. We're going to come on to standards in a minute. It's a standard. You have to talk about it. So how is AI improving the planning and buying of CTV and perhaps even the creative?
I think AI is, if I sort of, can I take it even bigger?
Of course.
I think AI is impacting this industry hugely at the moment. I think what we're really seeing is everything from planning through targeting, hugely through optimization, and then through measurement. Going through this period of rapid disruption. At Index, we have our marketplaces product, which effectively allows our partners to curate the inventory that they want, but while doing that, layer their own decisioning onto the supply side. So effectively picking and choosing not only the supply that they want, but also adding any of those other targeting elements that would historically have been layered in the DSP. And what we're seeing now is a new sort of swathe of AI companies coming into the space and offering those sell-side decisioning services into the market. We're seeing some of the agencies also develop those in-house themselves, but effectively being able to take the information that's going to go into a bid request and be able to layer their own special sauce, their own decisioning into that before that bid request then goes to the DSP. And so being earlier, we talked very briefly on this, but gives them access to much, much more scale in terms of what they want to do. It gives them more signal. The role of the SSP has always been to take the supply from the various publishers, media owners that we work with, normalize that into a bid request that the DSP can absorb. And so that normalizing process basically indicates we get different data from different publishers, from different media owners. And by normalizing that, if you're only able to optimize based on what reaches the DSP, you're not going to have full access to all of the data. And so I think the reason I think that we're seeing these AI companies come in and have such phenomenal impact on optimization, driving outcomes, driving performance, is that they're able to take on board that all of the different signal now and make those decisions at much bigger scale. So rather than it being something that is coming late in the process, just before the transaction, you're able to bring it in earlier and have more impact that way. So it's, I think in the beginnings of AI and custom optimization, you'd see most DSPs allowed perhaps 4 or 5 of the parameters within a bid request. Gosh, we're getting geeky, aren't we? Yeah. 4 or 5 parameters being able to be adjusted and tweaked, and effectively creating rules. That's really what an algorithm is. What we're now seeing is, there could be 120 different parameters, maybe even more now, or signals that we could see. And so the AI is only able to be as good as the signal that it gets. And so by giving it more signal, by feeding it more, it's smarter, it's making smarter decisions, it's making those decisions much faster, which in turn drives better results.
Right.
And so I think we're really at this sort of tipping point, at this cusp now of this being really normal for people. Again, it's got a lot easier as well, like where there are loads of partners you can work with now, in a way that before you'd have needed in-house data science capabilities, you'd have needed in-house data engineers. Now you can have a conversation about your advertiser briefs and their objectives, and you can get something that within a few hours is learning and making the best decisions for your brand. So I think it's really the outcomes and the performance that this is driving that's driving adoption.
I had Fern Potter on the podcast a little while ago, and she was saying that DSPs can only do a certain amount of, we used to call it sniffing traffic, if you like they can only take in so much traffic and understand so much traffic, right? So is there a benefit to the publisher to having you taking their data, normalizing it and making it available to a DSP before the DSP has to do that? Because a lot of traffic would go unsold because the DSP couldn't understand what it was, and so it would just sort of reject it, right?
That historically has always been and continues to be the role of the SSP to take that inventory and package it up into those bid requests that we send out. I think, yes, the advantage to the DSP of this move towards sell-side decisioning is really that they're getting 100% of the inventory through that an advertiser wants to buy.
Yeah.
Where they transact on a percent of media, if their cost is based on how many bid requests they have to receive, it's the QPS is the technical term, queries per second. If their cost is based on receiving all of this, and then they actually earn money based on how well they utilize that. Anything that you can do as an SSP to help them better utilize the inventory means they have more money coming in, more transactions for the volume of bid requests that they have to handle. So yeah, there's absolutely a nice incentive for the DSPs in this as well.
Okay. So are there any standards that have been put in place? Obviously, it's probably a teenager now, isn't it, or early 20s CTV in terms of adult human life. And typically, as more money goes into a medium and it grows up, if you like, then there's more standards. Are there more standards that are in place? Are there more standards coming? What's that sort of landscape look like?
I love that you've brought this up, because standards are not necessarily a very sexy or fun thing to talk about, but they are so important. They are the foundation that allows us to, for those transactions to happen and to happen at scale. I think of them as like language and words. As you increase the standards, you're increasing your vocabulary, you're able to communicate more effectively, and everyone's able to understand. And so you have standards driving interoperability. It's a long word, but effectively making things possible that previously weren't, making things able to connect in and communicate with each other. And so I think the biggest change really recently was really the arrival of the OpenRTB 2.6 spec. That allowed for a couple of big things. One of the biggest impact in the CTV space being allowing for podding. So effectively, all of those rules that as a TV planner or buyer, you would have had to put in place around duplication, juxtaposition, and so on. So, you'd never want to run a Mercedes brand right next to a BMW brand ad, right? So, and sometimes you'd want to be able to control position in ad break, right? You might have an advertiser who's paid more to have the first spot and so on. So the OpenRTB spec has really enabled all of those sort of real requirements for TV buying to be transacted in the programmatic space and through programmatic pipes. And so I think that's been a huge change. There's still a few folks who need to adopt that. It's not always easy moving to the next standard. So if anyone listening hasn't and has questions and they want to talk to someone, feel free to reach out to the team at Index on that. And there's more standards to come. I think the big we talked a little bit about measurements just now, and I think there's a huge amount of capability within the IAB spec, which has a terrible name. It's the Open Measure SDK or OM SDK. It doesn't speak to anyone. Like, you could talk to anyone in telly, and they're like, well, "What's that got to do with me?" So my plea to the IAB is they get better at naming. Yeah. So language isn't good, but within there, there's a huge volume of capability that exists, and so I think where we can move to common standards that already exist, that already cover for the use cases we need to cover for, great. And so things like frequency capping, things like, so to avoid that repetition and so on, are already available. They're just not necessarily as adopted as people might like them to be.
Well, that was my next question, actually. So one of my pet peeves when CTV was a young child, used to get a lot of the same ad over and over and over again, especially if you're watching a box set on repeat. So will podding or even sell-side decisioning kind of help take away that repetitive ad for the same brand time after time?
The standard won't help it unless people adopt it.
Yes.
So the standard 100%.
Will the adoption of this standard help that? Yeah.
Oh gosh, I've gone into like pedant's corner over here. But yes, 100% adoption of that standard does enable the broadcaster and the advertiser to avoid that. So hopefully, as you're watching your latest box set, that's happening much less now than it used to.
I think it is happening less. But when it does happen, we feel bad because Karen and I have been in advertising for 30 years, but we're hating on the advertising because we're like, I can't listen to another ad saying, oh my God, make it stop.
I think the other thing that's interesting, and the other work that's coming into standards, but that links to that is live events. So historically, say historically when we're talking about CTV, which is still in its in early sort of adoption phases, but when we think about live events, I think it's the only area of TV that has historically, has not yet moved into this sort of programmatic advertising space. And there are some standards currently. It's the LEAP standard, the Live Event Ad Protocol. I'm saying it very slowly for people who are trying to take notes of, again, these different naming conventions are hard for people, but the LEAP...
We love an acronym, don't we?
We do love an acronym, but the LEAP standards are in consultation at the moment. So if someone listening is an advertiser who wants to advertise in live TV and wants to do that programmatically, or if you're a broadcaster or streamer and you have that live content and you want to monetize it programmatically, like get involved, review that. Actually, depending on when we release this podcast, but if you're hearing it and it's still in consultation, then please do contribute. I know the IAB are very keen to have a lot of different perspectives in there. But the challenge with live has always been that there are such a sudden influx of audience hitting the ad break at exactly the same moment that the ad tech partners are not and the sort of technology is not necessarily ready to cope with that influx. When you think of how hard it is to run pacing on a campaign, you suddenly go, well, there's nothing running this hour, and then suddenly, or this minute, and then suddenly, boom, all of the bid requests arrive. You've got to have the SSP ready to handle that influx, and then the DSP ready to respond to those bid requests. And so some of that is around agreeing on the language. If you're watching a box set, but you're watching it as it's going out on the first day, at the first moment that episode is released, even if you're streaming it, is that live? Is that not live? There's a lot of questions, and it's that sort of thing that's going into the standards. Like, how do we make sure that an advertiser knows what they're buying? If this is the brand new episode that's just dropping and that's where they want to be, we want to make sure they're in that one. But then they might want to make the decision that if you and Karen are going back and watching that at a later point, but it's the first time you're seeing that, is that the same thing as if you're watching it the very day it drops or not? So it's interesting that I think live events is not just about sports as well. That is the obvious one, but you have a lot of cultural events, whether that is the latest season
music, I suppose that's sport. Yeah,
music, but culture, politics. There's a lot of big live events that happen, and I think that's the final area. When you were asking, are there any areas where there aren't yet standards? So I think that's the last area that is now really being buttoned up, and I'm excited to see what that release is, because I think once everything can be bought programmatically, that perhaps then changes this conversation from an ongoing where are we in the journey to, well, it's all possible. Now it's purely about adoption and education. Yeah,
cool. So I know you said you didn't want to get your crystal ball out, but I'm going to ask you to do so. How do you think what's next for CTV? What's the next big thing? You talked about the standards there and live events and that's great. But what do you think? Where do you think it's going? It's obviously growing, and it's going to continue to grow. Easy for me to say. But what do you think the most exciting thing is on the horizon for CTV?
I mean, honestly, I think this live events piece is game changing. I think it's really only in live events where you have the audience so captivated by the screen. Those are the environments where you're not second screening, you haven't got your mobile or your iPad on the go while you're watching telly. You are actively so engaged in that content. So I think giving advertisers the ability to be in those live environments at the exact moment that their audiences are solely focused on the screen, I think that's probably the single most exciting thing that's going to happen in CTV this year.
Brilliant. Cadi, absolute pleasure. Thank you for making the time. I know you're super busy.
Mike, I've really enjoyed chatting today.
Likewise. Thanks for being on the podcast. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.